This. All right, very well. Now, there are seats in the front for, is everyone here Catholic? Is that what's going on? No one will take the front row? Come on forward. Come on forward. There's plenty of room in the front row. I know they're not padded seats, but you should have come early, okay? What can I tell you? All right, so as was mentioned, this is understanding and combating the sexual revolution. So there's two parts to this. First part is understanding the sexual revolution, and then we'll talk about combating the sexual revolution. So first off, we're going to explain what is the sexual revolution. When I use this term, what do I mean? And then we're going to explain the sexual state. So Marty has already mentioned to you the concept of the sexual state. I want to talk with you about how the sexual state operates so that you can recognize it when you see it, all right? And then the next part will be combating the sexual revolution, what everyone here can do to contribute. Now, I'm aware that you guys are all in as activists. This is one of the most active groups in the country. But I hope that what we talk about here will help you be more effective and more potent in the amount of time that you, the 24 hours a day that you actually have. Actually, I heard that you guys have more than 24 hours a day in Cleveland. That's what I heard, because you guys get so much done over here, okay? So we'll talk about that towards the end, and then as Marty said, there'll be time for questions and interactions with the audience. So I'm just curious, just to get an idea of who's in the room here. How many Catholics do we have in the room? Okay, who are my evangelicals in the room? Okay, okay, and do we have any Orthodox Christians here? Okay, my co-worker, Father Mark Hodges, is out at the Ruth Institute table. He's the only priest out there with bling, so you know that's who he is, okay? And he's actually based in Lima, so he's not so far away from you guys. The Ruth Institute's kind of a geographically dispersed internet organization held together with the magic of the internet. So for those of you who are Catholic, I just want to put this thought in your mind. Do you remember what it was like when John Paul was the Pope? And he drew these huge crowds everywhere, right? This is him at the University of at Arizona State, in Sun Devil Stadium of all things, and thousands and millions of people came to hear him. And when he was Pope, we felt like we were part of something big and something important and something beautiful. That's how we felt. And a lot of us don't feel that now. So addressing that feeling is one of the things that I want to ultimately do in our talk, because we mustn't, as he would tell us, be not afraid, right? So the fact that it doesn't feel the same way is, in a sense, unimportant, and we'll deal with that. All right, so the first thing I want to ask you guys to do is to do something that is in your bag. All of you received a tote bag. Did all of you get a welcome bag? In your bag, there are 2 pieces of material from the Ruth Institute. We got to put 2 pieces in because we have 2 speakers. I'm speaking today, and my colleague, Father Paul Sullins, will be talking about post-abortion healing research tomorrow. So since there were 2 of us, we got to put in 2 pieces of literature. And the one I want to call your attention to is this one that looks like this, and it says at the top, take the pro-life survey. And there are actually room for 2 people to do the survey. It just lays out better on a piece of paper like that. And here's the point of this survey. We pioneered this at the Students for Life of America convention right after the March for Life in Washington, D.C. I don't know if any of you went to that convention or are familiar with that convention, but about 3,000 young people went to that, and it's a big activist conference, and of course the average age, literally the average age on our survey of people who took our survey was 28. And that was only because there were a few people in their 70s who signed up, but the youngest, but most of them, of course, were in their 20s. The point of this survey is for us to establish that many, many pro-life activists are not single-mindedly, narrowly focused on abortion, okay, which is what our opponents want to say about us. What we want to say is that, and if you look at the issues that we have down here, item 4 on here, and by the way, if you don't have this, we have them at the Ruth Institute booth, so you can easily go over there and get one. And 2 people can fill it out, so mom, if you came with 4 kids or whatever, and so you only have 1 tote bag for your whole family, 2 people can fill it out, or you can get more copies. But the point is, item 4, what other issues concern you? Euthanasia, surrogacy, sperm donation, egg donation, worldwide declining fertility, contraception, comprehensive sex education, the decline of marriage, and other, where you could fill in the blank with whatever else is there. My point, our point in saying this, is that the pro-life movement, the pro-life issue, concerns itself with its own seamless garment, which is to say that one of the things that is driving abortion is the decline of marriage. Okay, and those things are intimately related. That's why Molly Smith invites me to come and talk, and that's why you came to hear me, I suppose, right? Because you know that you have an intuition that that's correct. The other thing you'll see in your pouch that comes from us is this one that says, what keeps abortion rates below 5%? And we have little stickers and buttons that say that on it. It's a great conversation starter. And the sneak answer is, I will just peek ahead and give you the answer. The answer is marriage. Of pregnancies to married women, 4% end in abortion. Of pregnancies to unmarried women, 27% end in abortion. Okay? So the decline of marriage is obviously a factor in what we're dealing with. And this question is kind of a leading question. If you wear the button and people ask you, well, what are you talking about? Then you can start talking to them about how abortion and marriage are related to one another. And by the way, we did an article about this. I wrote an article about this based on the survey which we did at Students for Life. And so I can credibly say this is a bigger issue, this is a bigger movement, and so your participation in this survey will contribute to that understanding that there's more going on here. All right, so the Ruth Institute, just to introduce ourselves, the Ruth Institute is an international interfaith coalition to defend the family and build a civilization of love. And the book that Marty mentioned is called The Sexual State. And the thing I want to say to you about The Sexual State, this poor book, it came out in the summer of 2018. The poor book was out of date the moment it was printed. If you look at it from the perspective of what is the latest and greatest crazy thing that is coming down the pike on the sexual revolution, of course, the minute you print it, something new comes up that's more crazy than the thing before it. But so if you look at it that way, never mind, the book's useless. But what the book has going for it is a structure, an underlying intellectual structure that will help you make sense of all of these things that are seemingly unrelated, so you can see how they're related and how if you can combat one of the things, you've got the tools you need really to go on and move into the next area and combat the other thing. So that's the point of this book, The Sexual State. And so what I'm going to do now is to break down for you what I mean by the sexual revolution. When I use this term sexual revolution, what am I talking about? There are three points. That's it. Okay. There are three planks to the sexual revolution, in my opinion. I break it down into three interlocking ideologies. A good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. Okay? A good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. I call that the contraceptive ideology. Okay? So it's not the pills, it's not the devices, it's the ideology that is really so toxic. And all of you in the pro-life movement, this is what you guys have been dealing with from the beginning, right? Is this idea that if you just use a condom every time, nothing bad will happen, you know? That's a basic idea. The second idea of the sexual revolution is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex and babies from marriage. That marriage is completely unimportant, completely insignificant as a preferred place in which to have your sexual activity. I call that the divorce ideology. And I'll show you why in a little bit, why I call it that. And then the third ideology says that a good and decent society should do everything possible to wipe out all the differences between men and women, except those that are explicitly chosen by the individuals. And we've had to add this new thing on there because of transgenderism. Okay, that's that last proviso. That I call the gender ideology. And I will say a few words about each one of these ideologies as we go. What I want to explain now, though, is that I developed this typology. I developed this typology or this structure when I was involved in the marriage debates. So I was very involved in the whole debate over the definition of marriage, whether marriage should be redefined to be a genderless institution, so that instead of marriage being the union of one man and one woman, it's now the union of any two persons. As you know, this is what the law of our land is. So I was very involved in those debates. So you notice I didn't use the term gay marriage. The reason I don't say gay marriage is because there's no such thing as a gay marriage. There's only marriage, and it's very important that you not use their terminology as you're speaking. So it took me a couple sentences to say what I meant, but that's okay. It helps people think through what you're actually doing. When you use this crazy term gay marriage, what they really mean is remove the definition, redefine marriage, remove the gender requirement for marriage. That's what's really being talked about. So I developed this typology, as I said, during these debates, because I realized as I was going out week after week debating this topic, that people in their minds had already redefined marriage. And here's how they had redefined marriage. They had already, in their minds, separated sex from babies. In their mind, sex is an unimportant act that has no social consequences because it's a sterile act, right? That's the norm in our culture, is that sex is a normatively sterile activity. Babies are thrown in as an afterthought if you happen to have quirky lifestyle preferences. That's the norm in our culture. So they've already redefined marriage in that sense, so that sexual act has been redefined to be a sterile act intrinsically. Secondly, they've already separated sex and babies from marriage. Most people, back in 2012 or whenever it was that I was developing this, people mentally had already separated sex and babies from marriage. They already had the idea that attaching children to their parents was not important. The children are so resilient, it doesn't matter if the adults switch out their sex partners periodically. This will have no impact on children whatsoever because, after all, children are resilient, okay? So when I would come to a debate and I would say, if you have two men marrying each other and now you're going to say that they're going to be parents, that they're going to have legal parenting rights, somehow their mother has been legally detached from them, and this is a bad thing. And people will go, well, what about divorce? And after having that conversation multiple times, I finally said, I don't care what the political people say. We have got to address the question of, what about divorce? Right? We have to deal with this. We have to face up to the fact that millions of children are already being separated from a parent, an innocent parent who has done no wrong, through the divorce code. So we have to deal with this, and this ideology already laid the groundwork, you could say, for removing a gender requirement for marriage. And then finally, wiping out all differences between men and women. The culture has been working on that for a long time, and so therefore the sex of the body is unimportant. Therefore, redefining marriage to be a genderless institution where you don't necessarily have to have one man and one woman. You can have whatever combination you want. That the groundwork for that's already in place. And this is why we were having trouble getting anywhere, explaining to people why redefining marriage is going to be a bad thing, because it had already been redefined right out from under our feet without us really paying attention. So, and I think people couldn't figure out why we were the big holdouts. Why are these people holding out and not going along with the program when all the groundwork's already there? And I think this is one of the reasons. The only thing they could come up with is we must be mean people who hate everybody. That's all that was left in their arsenal. Now, I don't think this was a good faith argument. I mean, it never really was, but that's okay. You see where I'm going with this, that the groundwork had been laid, and that's why it's important that we go to the heart of the issue and deal with the whole of the sexual revolution. So sometimes people will ask me, Dr. Morse, what is the end game of these ideologies? What do these people want? Why are they so invested in the contraceptive ideology, the divorce ideology, and the gender ideology? What do they want? And I believe, with good reason, that the end game of the contraceptive ideology is population control. It was the beginning of it. It is where they're going. They have never given that up. I talk about that in The Sexual State. And you're going to hear Steve Mosier talk about it, I think later today, somewhere on the program. Mosier's going to be talking about that. The divorce ideology, their end game is to completely separate the legal definition of parenthood from biology. They, instead of the state recording the natural reality of mom and dad, they want parenthood to be the result of legal contracts made, legally binding contracts made between anybody who wants to. So you can have 2 or 3 or 4 people count as legal parents. This is where they want to go. And you probably haven't heard this, but I have no doubt at all that this is where they're headed. In fact, in California, a child can have 3 parents on a birth certificate. Okay, so that was embedded, implied in gay marriage all along, right? Okay, the redefinition of marriage will necessarily create the redefinition of parenthood, see? All right, so the gendered ideology, and we're also well on our way to progress, if you want to call it that, in this area. Their end game is to eliminate the concept of male and female from law and society. That's the end game. That's where they're headed. Okay, so if any of my minders are out there, if my friends at the Southern Poverty Law Center or Right Wing Watch, any of you guys are listening in, here's your money quote, you guys. This is where Dr. Morse proves how crazy she is, and you can send that out to all your followers and raise money on me. Okay, on attacking me because I'm so bad. All right, so on each of these 3 ideologies, I have a full 45-minute podcast on them. And by the way, if you will fill out the survey, we'll have your email address. I will email these slides to you, so you'll have all these links and everything like that. So do please fill out the survey. Anyway, so you can learn more about all of these topics, which I don't have time to cover in detail about each one of these. But just to say one word about each of them, the contraceptive ideology, as I say, has the idea that sex is sterile and that also sex is an entitlement. And of course, nobody blurts this out. But the fact is, behind this whole thing is the idea that everybody's entitled to the sex lives they want with the minimum of inconvenience. That's the world that we're in. And this is directly related to the crisis of sexual abuse. Whether you're looking at it on the Catholic side with the clergy sexual abuse, whether you're looking at Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, who, by the way, did not kill himself, okay? Right? Wherever you're looking at it, this concept that you're entitled, this is a core reality that's driving the sexual abuse crisis. I get to do whatever I can get away with, as long as it's consensual. Well, we know now that consent is a very slippery concept, right? That's not nearly enough to protect people. It's not nearly enough. And it's very important that we in this room pay attention to this, although I will be the first to tell you, dealing with sexual abuse is gross, it's icky, I would rather not have to deal with it, but we have to deal with it. So there you are, okay? If we don't deal with it, do you think Hollywood's gonna deal with it? Do you think the public schools are gonna deal with it? Do you think the Boy Scouts are really gonna get to the bottom of it? I don't think so. The only people who have the possibility of getting to the bottom of it are people of faith who are willing to go the whole mile, to go the final step and deal with the issues at their core. So that's the contraceptive ideology. As you know, all of you guys in this room know, abortion is the backup plan for contraceptive failure, right? You guys all know that. I don't have to explain that. But I found somebody actually saying that, an expert who is promoting contraception in foreign countries, part of the population control movement and so on, and literally said, it is unethical to provide contraceptions in national family programs without ensuring abortion is available as a backup. So they know it. When they're pretending to not know, they're pretending. You're right, they know that these issues are related. Now, we have an additional pamphlet out here that was not in the bag. My colleague Nori back here will give these out. This is called the Manifesto for the Family, and this is basically the last chapter of the book, The Sexual State. And so we'll pass these out now, and we won't go through it in too much detail, but I do want you to have it. It's a 15-point plan for family justice and the civilization of love. The first 10 items are things that the government should stop doing, okay? The first 10 items are ways in which the government is already actively promoting the sexual revolution and needs to stop. Okay, so if you have libertarian friends, and I suppose we all do, and they say to you, why are you imposing your morality on us? You say, why don't you guys stop promoting your morality on us? Why do we have comprehensive sexual education in the schools? Mr. Libertarian, how did it get to be the government's business to teach children to put condoms on bananas and even worse things that they're now teaching them? Why? Where are the libertarians when you need them? Okay, so now, the divorce ideology, just briefly, this is the basic idea that kids don't really need their own parents. And so at the Ruth Institute, we ask the question, what is owed to the child? What do we owe children? And that's a very scary question to ask if you want to have sexual license, right? Because now maybe you have some obligations to children. So here's the way we break it down. We break it down by saying children are owed their identity. Every person has a right to know their cultural heritage and genetic identity. Every person has a right to know that, even if you can't have a relationship with your parents, okay? Because that's the next thing. People have a right, children have a right to a relationship with their natural mother and father, except for an unavoidable tragedy, which we all know there are plenty of unavoidable tragedies out there, right? Somebody dies, somebody's mentally ill, things happen. Things can happen that can't be avoided. But we must say that this is unjust to children. This is a loss for children. Okay, it's a loss. Even if it's an unavoidable loss, it is a loss to them. And even if they can't have the relationship with the parent, they still have a right to know who that parent is. Okay, so this right away wipes out all of the third-party reproduction industry, which is based on anonymity. It is based on the idea that you've got an anonymous sperm donor, an anonymous egg donor who is never going to show up in the child's life. And the state makes this possible. This would not be possible. There would be no black market for such a thing, because what the state makes possible is the legal recognition of who counts as a parent and who's out of the picture. See? So the Ruth Institute, this is a core value of the Ruth Institute, that we say every child has a right to a relationship with their natural parents except for an unavoidable tragedy. And every person without exception has the right to know their cultural heritage and genetic identity. So now, how can we secure these rights to the child? Well, we could make a plan for parents to cooperate with each other for a lifetime so that they see each other, so that it's possible for the child to be in relationship with both of the parents. This is not a guarantee, but it's the best chance. So if mother and father live on opposite sides of the country, obviously the child's ability to be in relationship with at least one of those parents is going to be impaired. So we should make a plan in advance that they're going to work together, that they're going to cooperate together. So we could put it in negative terms and say, you cannot be having sex with outside of marriage or before marriage, because how is that ever going to work? Okay, you should not be divorcing people without cause. You should not be, I'm fed up with your father is not an unavoidable tragedy. That's a decision, okay? No petty criticism of your spouse. Okay, that shuts us down, ladies, doesn't it? Okay, the feminists gave us a lot of things to complain to our husbands about and nag them about. We got a whole new list of permission slips from them. I didn't need any permission slips. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I was fine in that area of nagging my husband without any coaching. Okay, and certainly no third-party reproduction. Or we could put this all in positive terms. These are the prohibitions. Now let's look at it from the positive terms. What are we positively for? The lifelong cooperation plan is get married before you have sex. Only have sex with your spouse. You have to admit that would solve a lot of problems. Right? Stay married unless somebody does something really awful. And be nice. Be nice to your spouse, you know, just stop all this stuff, right? In other words, traditional Christian sexual morality protects the interests of children. Okay? This, what I just had up there on the slides, those were the key points of traditional Christian sexual morality. So if you start from children's rights and the child's perspective, and you apply logical reasoning, you reason outward from there, what you will end up with is traditional Christian sexual ethics, which is to say the church has been right all along, hence the subtitle of my book, okay? The church has been right all along. Now, those of you who know theology know this isn't the only reason for the traditional Christian sexual morality. That's true, it's not the only reason, but you know, at this point, it's a pretty darn compelling reason, when you think about what has happened to children and the kinds of things people have to put up with for a lifetime. So that's the divorce ideology. And that's why we spend a lot of time on that issue at the Ruth Institute. So briefly, what's the gender ideology? The gender ideology has morphed over time. The original version of the gender ideology is that men and women are identical. This is the feminism that I grew up with. I see people of all generations here in the audience, so those of you who are of my generation will remember that when we started college, we were all told men and women are absolutely identical, except women are better, right? Right? I mean, that's pretty much what we're dealing with, right? And so therefore, it's a moral imperative to wipe out all the differences between men and women, all right? And so that includes in sports and choice of career and attachment to children and all sorts of things have come under government scrutiny, right, to fulfill this moral imperative of wiping out all the differences between men and women. Now, the new version of the gender ideology is to wipe out all the differences between men and women, except those that the individual specifically chooses to embrace. And this is, in my longer talks on the gender ideology, I go into a little bit more detail about how old-style feminism has morphed into the new transgender gender ideology. Okay, so I don't have time to do that, but I do want to leave you with a couple of resources. 2 people that you should follow on the topic of gender dysphoria. You should follow Brandon Showalter, who is a reporter for the Christian Post. And Brandon has done more reporting on this topic than anyone I know. He interviews the parents, and I'm talking about heartbroken parents of children who've decided they're in the wrong body. And he interviews people who have desisted, that is, people who did some full gender transition to their bodies, whether through hormones or surgery or both, and then they figure out, no, this isn't what I want, and are trying to walk it back. So Brandon is a very brave guy and has interviewed a lot of these people. So he's a guy worth following if you want to know what's going on in this area, or if you have someone who needs to be convinced that this is a serious issue. The other person that I recommend to you is Dr. Michelle Cretella. She's the president of the American College of Pediatricians. And she and her organization, they give the most detailed medical information about transgenderism. Any medical questions you may have, they will generally have the answers, or at least the beginnings of answers, so that when you hear these factoids coming out in the news and so on, they'll help you deal with it, they'll help you put it into place. And by the way, I see you all scribbling down madly. If you will fill out the survey, I will send you this, and then you don't have to write it all down. So anyway. All right, and then a couple of articles that I strongly recommend that you read in this area. One is by a woman named Jennifer Bialik, and it's called "Who Are the Rich White Men Institutionalizing the Transgender Ideology?" Okay. Sorry? No, it's not on the survey itself, but we're going to email when you give us your email, we'll email the whole set of slides to you. It'll all be there. So anyway, and then a few years earlier, there was an article called The New Atlantis, which gives scientific information about a lot of the issues related to the gender ideology. So these are resources that you can get started with. If you need more, we can point you in the right direction. So a question I'd like to pose to you is, why do you think the sexual revolution moved so quickly into transgenderism after the gay marriage debate? After the Supreme Court redefined marriage in the Obergefell case, right? What did people think was going to happen? Did anybody really think that transgenderism was going to be the next move? I didn't think that. I thought they were going to go down the contract parenting thing. That's where I thought they were going to go. But anyhow, when they did in fact turn all of those resources, all that money, all that social infrastructure that they had built up, they turned it all from gay marriage over to transgenderism. When they did it, I said, I know what they're doing. I know what they're doing. It was never really about marriage. The gay marriage debate was never really about marriage. It was not about your gay niece, your lesbian niece, or your gay coworker having a nice white picket fence lifestyle. That is not what gay marriage was about. It was about destabilizing gender. It was about removing the significance of the sex of the body from law and society. That's what it was really all about. And that is why transgenderism was the next move, okay? Because that is a radical destabilization of the body, right? I mean, your own body. It's not just a social construct anymore. It's saying your relationship to your body is now in question, right? In a way that has never been questioned before. This is where our friends at the Personhood Alliance are right on, in the sense that they see that the question of our time is the question of who and what is a person. And the Christian answer to that question is the only humane answer to that question. The alternatives are all either incoherent or horrible. Okay, so for the true revolutionary, you need to understand that the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution, and the revolution is always about power. This is always about power. It has always been about power. Now, I want you to be aware that the LGBT Coalition is very unstable. It's not possible anymore to be pro-LGBT, and I will tell you why. Because the L's and the T's are in open warfare. That's why. The lesbians believe correctly that they are being erased from the movement. See, these rich white men don't really care about the lesbians. It was nice to have their pictures on the commercials when you were trying to make people feel non-threatened about redefining marriage. Two nice middle-class ladies together with their children. Who could be against that? But they're done with that. They don't need you anymore. They've thrown those ladies under the bus. It's the lesbians who are fighting tooth and nail to say, heck no, we don't want men who say they're women showing up at lesbian music festivals, and we sure as heck don't want them in domestic violence centers. Are you crazy? So the lesbians are in open warfare with the transgender movement, and it's very important that we talk to them, right? That we talk to them, that we work with them. There's a group called the Hands Across the Aisle Coalition that is working on legislative stuff, but also friendship. They're trying to build friendship with these people to say, you know, look, overall our picture is more sound than the picture is that you have been working with up until now. So the sexual revolutionaries are basically throwing the lesbians and the feminists under the bus. Those of us who have been in the pro-life movement for a long time, we know perfectly well what it's like to be thrown under the bus, because we, pro-life women, were the first to go under the bus. This is all supposed to be pro-women, right? This room is half women, at least half women, right? We never counted, right? We were always thrown under the bus. So this is part of the pattern that you observe with the sexual revolution. And this is the big problem with the sexual revolution, is that they're trying to separate sex from babies, but actually sex really does make babies. Does everybody know that? All right, good, good, good. I always like to check on that. Okay, separating sex from babies, sex and babies both from marriage, children actually do need their parents. Children really do need their parents. And wiping out the differences between men and women, hey, you know what? Men and women actually are different, and the human body really is significant. So therefore, we can say, without any doubt, the sexual revolution is irrational. Its goals are impossible. It cannot stand on its own. Therefore, it requires force and massive amounts of propaganda. You got to really work on people to make them think sex doesn't make babies. You got to really work on them to make them think that men and women are, that there's no difference, it's nothing there, okay? And that is why and how it is a totalitarian ideology. This is a totalitarian ideology. No Christian should have anything to do with it. We got to quit pussyfooting around with it. This is on the same scale with the other totalitarian ideologies of the 20th century. So I want to say a few words to you about how the sexual state operates. This is our segue into the whole topic of how the sexual state operates and why they need the state, why this isn't organic. This won't stand up on its own. It's got to be propped up all the time. So propaganda is a very important part of it. Once you start looking around, you'll see it everywhere, right? But hiding and silencing the victims is also a crucial part of this whole thing. And just proving that it's irrational is not enough. We think we're done. This is our big mistake, right? But we'll get there. I want you to see that the propaganda has been going on for a long time. This is a film put out by Walt Disney in 1968 in cooperation with the Population Council. And it is basically a pro-population control film. It is basically saying contraception is just fine, it will solve all your problems, and so on. This has been going on for a long time. Okay, that's what I want you to see there. Silencing the victims, very important. This particular image is from the Freedom March. These are people who have lived an active homosexual life and who no longer do so, and who want to say, hey, we're here, we're out, we're proud, get over it. They want to try to say that. But of course, they're not allowed to exist because they undermine the narrative which says, if you're gay, you were born that way, once gay, always gay. Any attempt to change is morally suspect, and that's why we're dealing with all these bans on talk therapy. You know, it's quite amazing, actually. But so these guys, they're victims, in a sense, of the sexual revolution. They can't be allowed to exist. You guys all know this with the women who regret their abortion. They're not supposed to exist. They're not supposed to be anybody in that category. That's an empty set. Women are fine, you know. But it's been in the literature for years that this isn't true, right? And my colleague, Father Sullins, will be talking about that tomorrow, some of his recent research on that subject. So we want to part of our strategy is to call attention to the victims and survivors of the sexual revolution. And this is another pamphlet that we have out there that lists like millions of people who have been harmed by the sexual revolution. And it's true that the sexual revolutionaries are incorrect, okay? But it's not enough to say that. Yes, their views are irrational, self-contradictory, but you need to see that from their perspective, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Because making you do something that is self-contradictory, making you go against your belief, the humiliation involved in that is part of that's part of how they exert control over people. And they've got a lot of power and a lot of money to get done what they want to do. Now, I'm going to just say one word about who's financing all of this. We could go on a long time about this, but in my book, I wrote about the women's whole health case, which was the Texas hospital admitting privileges law. It was the case where the people of Texas voted for a law saying you have to have certain restrictions on health clinics. And that was overturned in the Supreme Court, as you know. As you probably also know, there's a comparable Louisiana law that's in court right now, okay, which they tried to take account of the things that the court was complaining about and so on and so forth. But the thing I want to point out to you about this is that it turned out after the fact, all these newspaper articles started writing puff pieces about who financed the research that went into defeating the women's whole health case. The people who financed the research for probably about 10 years, they were pumping money into crafting arguments that would allow them to win in the court. And it was financed by the Hewlett Foundation, the Packard Foundation, and Warren Buffett's wife's foundation. Billionaires are financing this stuff. That's what you need to know. That's who we're up against. I don't have any billionaires on my donor list. How about Cleveland Right to Life? You get any money from Packard? Me neither. Okay. All right, so now we're going to take a few minutes to talk about discerning your role in combating the sexual revolution. This is probably the most important thing. And probably, I know all of you are already active, but I want to give you, again, a framework for thinking about how to be perhaps more effective in what you're already doing. So 2 steps, discernment, and then action. What are we going to do? Now, as I've mentioned, my book is called How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. As I mentioned, this was published in 2018, and that subtitle seemed kind of unfortunate at that point, because as soon as this book was published, right around the same time, all the revelations came out about Cardinal McCarrick and his decades of sexual abuse. And then more and more revelations have come out about it. And so to be standing up and saying, hey, the church is right, you know, it's kind of a little awkward moment there. But undaunted, we march forward because clergy sexual abuse is in fact related to the whole issue of the sexual revolution. I never wanted to deal with this issue, but I got to deal with it now. I can't back out from it. So combating clergy sexual abuse is something that has to be done, and it has to be done by people who love the church and by people who love the teachings of the church, most particularly, okay? And so the method that I'm about to outline is something that we kind of worked out in our attempts to deal with clergy sexual abuse, but I think it will apply to everything, okay? So that's what I want to put out there for you guys to consider. So the first thing we have to do at the Ruth Institute is to avoid mission creep, because there's so many things that you could deal with under the heading of the sexual revolution that you could spin yourself into chaos if you're not careful. So I made a point of writing down all the things we don't do, and I'm doing this for you because you have personal mission creep, a lot of you, right? Somebody will say, can't you help with this? And you're like, I have no earthly idea what you're even talking about. How could I possibly help? But since you're all busy people, and everyone knows that busy people are the ones who get things done, they're going to ask you, why don't you come and help me? And you're like, okay. Anyway, so I wrote down specifically, just to keep myself on track, things we don't do. We don't do investigative journalism. We don't do law enforcement. I don't have the power or authority to remove a priest from office. There are a whole bunch of things I can't do. Okay, does that mean we give up? No. It means we figure out what we can do and do that, okay? So some of you have specific vocations to these specific areas, and that's great. You're probably already doing those things. If you're in law enforcement or justice or something like that, you're already doing those things. What I want to talk to us about is for the average person who doesn't have a specific vocational call like this, what can you do to deal with clergy sexual abuse? And those of you who are not Catholic, I know that pretty much all the churches have similar problems, so what we're going to say here can be applicable to you as well, or to your Boy Scout situation or your public school or whatever it might be. I think there are 3 steps. Of course, first of all, we have to bring John Paul back and say, he has pointed out to us, it is not permissible for anyone to be idle. So everyone can do something. You don't have to do everything, but you got to do something. If we all do something, we have a chance. So there are 3 steps or 3 aspects of things that have to happen. We have to support the victims and survivors. I'm going to say more about each one of these things. But first, we want to support the victims and survivors. Second, we want to educate people about the full truth about Christian sexual morality so that they know what's going on, why this is all went south. And then we do have to advocate. Somebody has to advocate for better policies, whether it be church policies, public policies, personal policies, whatever it might be. We need supporters, educators, and advocates, and probably different personality types involved in each one of these, as you'll see. Okay. So supporting the victims and survivors, I want to just put in your mind, what would it have been like for some of these kids if people had believed them when they told their mom and dad, if they went and told the church secretary, if somebody had said, we believe you, and listened to them, the whole thing might have gone much better, right? And now part of the thing that is happening that's very constructive is that people are starting to support them. And people are starting to speak out, like the church secretary in Buffalo, right? And seminarians around the world, different seminarians are starting to speak out and so on. So people are supporting the victims in this respect. And you can do this by being friends. You don't have to be a whistleblower and put your neck out there, although somebody has to. But just supporting the person once they're out there. We don't want to leave them hanging out to dry. And some of you are going to be really good at this. You're going to just be in the course of having your friendships with people, you're going to be able to be there for them. And I want you to understand that this is a significant mission to be there for the victims of the sexual revolution, whether it's clergy sexual abuse or whatever it might be. Being there for the victims is a very important mission. Secondly, educate. We need to proclaim the truth about marriage, family, and human sexuality. Of course, none of this would have happened if people had lived up to the church's teaching. Isn't this pretty obvious? Right. But we have a lot of people, as we know, who want to blame the church and say your teachings are so unrealistic and you're such hypocrites and so on and so forth. Well, that doesn't help one bit, right? Because the fact is, if there's a mismatch between your behavior and your beliefs, that doesn't mean your beliefs were wrong. It could just mean you need to behave, But no one ever thinks of that. So, but the world needs this, and we now know that we cannot count on the clergy to teach the full truth about Christian sexual morality, and now we know why. Do I need to spell it out? We know why now. A lot of them won't say anything from the pulpit because they are compromised themselves in some way. Therefore, do we, the laity, have a role to play here? We certainly do. We have a role, and it's a legitimate role. We're not taking over anybody's authority in doing this. We have every right and responsibility to do this. So many ways you can do this, and this is really our forte at the Ruth Institute. You can do your personal reading. You can start reading groups. You can put on small events yourself. You can put on public programs at your church, at your school, at your public library. You can also educate your online friends and followers. A lot of you are in the media business. You don't know it. You just think you're a regular guy, but you got a Facebook page. Therefore, you have followers. You're part of the alternative media, all right? So I have a little project for you. Anybody recognize this guy's picture? Okay. This is Father James Martin, who promotes what we could call gay theology. Since you all recognize him, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but he's basically telling people that the right thing to do is to embrace your true gay identity. And there are people on the evangelical side who are doing the exact same thing. And those of you who are evangelical know their names better than I do, I'm sure. So he drives us crazy, right? Show of hands, does a guy drive you crazy? Right. And you think to yourself, why doesn't the Pope do something about it? Why doesn't the bishop do something about it? Why doesn't I don't know why they don't do something about it. We can't make them do anything about it, can we? No, we cannot. So what are we going to do about it? Here's what we're going to do about it. Every time you see Father James Martin online or somebody arguing about him, saying something about him, you educate the people on that thread and you say, you know, you may experience feelings of same-sex attraction. You may even act on them for a while. But that doesn't mean that that's your identity and that's your lifetime life. There are other people with other stories. Why don't you listen to our friend Hudson Biblow, who's a nice Catholic guy who went through this and who's now doing something different, who's now living a chaste life. Why don't you listen to our friend Elizabeth Wanning, who lived as a lesbian for years and is a nice evangelical lady who's been married to a man for 14 years and who has a ministry. Why don't you listen to Doug Mainwaring? Why don't you listen to Charlene Cothran? So we have a whole list of these people at the Ruth Institute, and what you do is you just go pick up one of their little stories, one of their little links, and you put it there on your Facebook page and say, hey, what about this guy, right? And by doing that, you're changing the narrative, as they say, but you're also presenting an alternative view that is more realistic. And if there's some confused teenager following Father Martin on Twitter, maybe that kid will see what you said and say, I'm going to go look up this guy and see what, you don't know where that's going to go. But can you do that? Every one of you can do it. If we all do it, if we do it every time, it's going to add up. So we have something that we call the cloud of witnesses, which my colleague Nora back there designed the webpage for. Cloud of witnesses is where we have all these people listed. You can go over there and you can find the names of people who have lived a gay lifestyle or a lesbian lifestyle and no longer do so. And you can pick up their information and link them around. Okay, so you can do that, right? Good, thank you. Thank you very much. So this is a doable project. Anyone can do this, right? Now, if you want to get really sneaky, you can bring one of these guys to your place. You can sponsor them as a speaker. You contact us, we'll help put you in touch with them and all of that. But if Father James Martin is coming to your town, there's no reason you can't have another speech the next week with one of our guys. And we actually did that in Rochester. And it was a big success. I mean, I won't say that they got as many people showing up to Hudson Biblow's talk as they got at Father Martin's, but that's okay. That's okay. He had a presence. He was there. We showed up, planted our flag, and said what we have to say. So this is possible, and this is manageable, and this is doable, and that's what we're trying to come up with. Now, advocate. I'm just going to put up a couple of examples. Now, by the way, the kind of person who sits down and have coffee with somebody, and who is doing this kind of thing, that's a very different person from the guys who are out there with signs, right? Different personality type. That's okay. So if you're the kind of person who likes to be out there, in your face, maybe, in a nice way, or whatever, if that's your thing, you can advocate for better church policies. Father, could you just shut down the face-to-face confessionals in our church? You guys, do I need to explain why that would be a constructive thing to do? You get why that's constructive, right? The face-to-face confessionals have been the scenes of many instances of clergy sexual abuse, haven't they? Did you guys know that? Oh my golly. Well, trust me, they have. Face-to-face confessionals, where the priest knows the identity of some poor kid coming in there and saying, oh, Father, I'm having these feelings. Oh, Father, I have a problem with pornography. Oh, Father, and now the Father knows who he is, and Father hits on him. Okay, that is a serious canonical crime, and that's the thing I think that finally got McCarrick undone, is that that the accusation on that score was credible. But anyway, well, just think about this. I thought everyone knew this. I'm sorry. You see how deep I am into the weeds of all this stuff? Anyway, it's nice to be here with nice people. I'm not in the weeds with all these things. But anyway, so you could say that to your pastor. Father, why don't we shut down the face-to-face? Father, why don't we have more times for confessional? Me and my friends will be there. Do we need more confessions? Yes, we need more confessions. Non-Catholics, I don't know what you guys do, but this is what we do, okay? And it helps. It truly helps. Father, we would like you to teach theology of the body and religious education. Right? We would like you to do that, Father. And while they're all hysterical dealing with the courts and bankruptcy and all this other stuff, you could just kind of, oh, by the way, I know you're busy, but we have this new curriculum. Wouldn't you like to try it? And they might do it. They might do it just to get rid of you, because if you make a nuisance of yourself in a nice way, of course, get rid of all of the secular sex education in your local Catholic schools, right? Do you have the right to advocate for that in your parish school? You certainly do. You certainly do. And would that help? Darn straight it would help. It absolutely would help. All right. And stick up for your good priests. When you know you've got a good priest who's being thrown under the bus, you got to stick up for them. Now, better public policies, the equivalent of this, again, take place in the public square. You can lobby the school board in your local public school to get rid of all of this exploitive sex education, which is getting worse, by the way, because of the gender ideology. They're teaching little 4-year-old boys that they can become girls and so on and so forth. But all of the infrastructure for doing that has been in place for a long time. They've been teaching kids sex ed. Now they're just adding something new onto it. So you can advocate for better policies there. You can combat the drag queen story hour. You can pressure the advertisers who are promoting the sexual revolution. And I don't have time to say too much about this, but we need to reclaim the professions. People, every profession in this society has been corrupted by the sexual revolution. Am I right? Law, medicine, the librarians, pharmacy, it's education, journalism, you name it. The professions have been corrupted. So particularly if you are a retired member of a profession, you should get involved because they can't fire you. Important point. They can't fire you, so go make a nuisance of yourself. But whatever you choose to do, whether you choose to support the victims or educate the public or advocate for better policies, understand that by doing that, you are becoming part of something big, which is to overcome the ill effects of the sexual revolution and to build a civilization of love. Let's get it done, people. Thanks. I did take too long. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Morse. At this point, we have time for your questions. After that, please stay seated. I have some announcements. But at this point, I will read questions that you submitted. Dr. Morse will answer. And we have about 3 minutes to cover, or so.
So the questions need to be written down on the card. That's your entry fee, is you have to write it down.
Yes.
Where are the cards? Where are the volunteers with the cards? Kids?
Okay.
What happened to our volunteers?
They were
Where'd they go?
walking up and down. I guess you didn't notice them. They were
Where
walking
are
up
they?
and
Where'd
down.
they go? Where'd the kids go?
So let me ask these questions,
All right,
and
well,
then
we gotta
we'll see if we have time for other questions. So one question is, have they made a mistake in allowing men to participate in female sports? Could it be a chink in their armor?
Oh, in what sense do we mean to make a mistake? It could be, if I understand the question correctly, of course it's incorrect, it's a mistake to do that. It's completely crazy to do that. It's the end of women's sports. Is it a chink in their armor? Only if we fight. Only if we go and, take advantage of it. It's one more irrationality of the sexual revolution, and they have gotten away with one irrationality after another that we've let them get by with, so we got to go fight it. So potentially it's a chink in their armor, but they might get away with it.
Do you know what the Pope has said on the sexual revolution?
Pope Francis has said a number of things against the gender ideology, where he has been very outspoken against the gender ideology. A document came out of the Vatican that was actually quite helpful on that subject. The Pope has been less helpful on matters relating to homosexual practice. He's been quite confused in that matter, and the people he has appointed have added to the confusion. In fact, that's probably the biggest way in which he's created confusion. And then on the question of divorce and remarriage, frankly, this pontificate has been a mess. Really, it's just a complete mess. There was no excuse for it, in my opinion. There was no excuse to create confusion where none existed. And at the time that that went down, that first synod, those two synods on the family, I wrote several times about the issue of what about who's going to accompany the children of divorce when their parents get divorced? Who's going to accompany the abandoned spouses? I'm telling you, people who have had annulments given to them, the reluctantly divorced, the person who wants to stay married, when the church turns around and grants an annulment to their spouse, those people are in agony, okay? No one is accompanying them. And so I asked, rhetorically, what are you going to do about that? And of course, I got deafening silence. But the teaching is still correct. The teaching is sound, and that's why we don't follow the man, we follow the catechism. And I would say we are catechism Catholics. Don't let people call you a liberal or conservative or anything like that. We're catechism Catholics. It's all right there in the catechism, and that's what we need to stand on.
Is transgenderism a segue to transhumanism?
Yes, I think it is, absolutely is. Transhumanism, you guys know what transhumanism is? You guys, you're so innocent. It's the next crazy thing, where rich people can switch out different body parts and so on, upload their brains into places and just do crazy things to make themselves immortal. And transgenderism and transhumanism, I think, are intellectually very closely related, and I suspect even in terms of the individuals. I don't know that for a fact, but I think I believe that to be true.
Is anyone really born with homosexuality?
Now that is a very interesting question. Is anyone born gay? The evidence would suggest that the answer is no. And the evidence I'm talking about is evidence from a large-scale study of the human genome, which showed very, very minimal correlation between sexual activity, sexual identity, and anything that you could observe on in the genes, in the genetic structure. So the way I like to put it is this, that the sexual revolutionaries have tried to say that being gay is like being black. And in fact, the evidence suggests that being gay is nothing like being black. And in fact, black people deeply resent the hijacking of their civil rights movement for something completely different. That has nothing to do with anything. So the evidence is that no one is born gay. And by the way, because they're so invested in the idea that people are born gay, they're psychologically, politically, and legally invested in that idea that people are born gay so that they can be like they're born black and so on and so forth. That is part of the reason they have to suppress the ex-gays. Right? That's why those guys, if those guys get a turn at the microphone, man, they undermine the whole shooting match, right? So that's why they're so adamant about that. A lot of those guys in that image that I had up there of the people on our cloud of witnesses, A lot of them left the gay lifestyle without any therapy at all. They left because of a profound conversion experience, an encounter with Jesus Christ. That's what changed them. And so they're not supposed to exist according to the born gay ideology, right? So they have to all be shut down. And that's part of how the sexual state operates. And they can't do it without the government's help. They need the government to help them silence people. I mean, and that's what's happening to your crisis pregnancy centers and the whole thing, right? The same thing. You see what I mean? You see how it's the same structure? That here's an alternative to the sexual revolutionary ideology. Here's an alternative solution to your problem. No, 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 no. That has to be shut down. That has to be, hampered in every way because that just undermines the whole story.
I have some announcements, but first, please join me in giving the great Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse another round of applause.